WisBrewView Live. A little bit of a stumble here. We got some technical things, but anyway, we're going to attempt to raise the craft beer IQ tonight. We got a lot of very intelligent craft beer people up on our panel to talk about some craft beer tonight. On the night that, if my sources are correct, was the 21st Amendment to repeal Prohibition was ratified. So it's kind of a big thing. It's kind of like we got a whole big barrel-aged version of our show here live tonight. We got a whole bunch of panelists. I think we'll just kind of go down the line, have each of you tell us who you are and a little bit about your brewery, and in your estimation, which style of craft beer you've probably had the most of in your lifetime. So we'll start with you, Bill.
I'm Bill Tressler from Hinterland Brewery. I don't know what kind of beer I've had the most of. All of it, I guess. Yeah, I really haven't met a beer I didn't like, but you know, that's it, I guess.
I'm Alex Fallish from Noble Roots Brewing Company. Just opened this year. Probably, I would say IPAs, like most of us. It's easy to drink.
Sam Yonda, Badger State Brewing, co-owner and head brewer. Style-wise, mostly IPAs also.
My name is Greg Maddock. I'm with Copper State Brewing Company, one of the ownership group. We as well are sort of new kids on the block this year in Green Bay. Boy, that's a great question. Actually, as I think back, 6 of the best years of my life were spent in central Minnesota going to college for part of my college career. And we had the fortunate experience of going to college in a town that had a small family-owned craft brewery at the time by the name of Shell's. So volume-wise, just based off of the years that I was there, that's probably the one I've had the most of.
Yeah, I can echo that. Brad Stillmank from Stillmank Brewing Company. Also a fan of IPAs and a lot of the other stuff, but personal preference is probably the full-flavored but easier drinking sorts of beers. Kolsch, Pilsner style, fruit beers, sours, that kind of stuff is my go-to, certainly these days. And I've been drinking my fair share these days, so college was good too. But anyway, I'll leave it with that.
Hi, I'm Kathy Flanigan. I write for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and I'm also the author of Beer Lovers, Wisconsin. So I don't have a particular style of beer I drink more than others. Whatever anybody sets in front of me. So that'll have to do.
I'm Matt Janzen, author and photographer of State of Craft Beer, and I would say Wisconsin beers first, and then closely followed Wisconsin craft beers, and then closely after that, Old Milwaukee. Volume.
Yeah, volume-wise, yeah. Imported a lot of Old Milwaukee. So we're talking about craft beer, so let's get on the same page. Matt, why don't you start us off with, give us kind of your definition of how you would define craft beer.
Well, the Brewers Association definition of craft beer is small, under 6 million barrels of beer, independent, not owned more than 25% owned by a non-craft brewer, and traditional, which basically means they don't make flavored malt beverages as their main styles. I wasn't necessarily going to use that for my book, but I generally followed that. And then when it came to Leinekugels, which my definition of a craft brewer, I guess, would be a brewery that works within their community and cares about it, which kind of sounds like BS, but I actually believe it. And Leinekugels is also one of those companies like that, but when I called them up and asked if I could come by and take photos, they're like, yeah, absolutely. And then they were like, just call our PR guy down in Chicago. And at that moment, I was like, I'm cutting it off at state lines. Like, that's not craft to me. So Brewers Association definition, and then my definition. I don't know if you guys have different definitions based on that.
Well, and Kathy, you cover beer, but it's all beer, and it's Beer Lovers Guide. So where do you you're kind of both worlds reporting on it. How do you kind of define the difference between the two?
I think of craft beer as exactly what Matt said. You know, I go by the Brewers Association definition. I mean, I'm in the hometown of Miller, so Miller's in my book, and Miller has a great tour for the history of beer. Milwaukee has a lot of beer history anyway, and Miller lays it out beyond just itself, because I think otherwise it would lose it. It's not the same as it used to be. Line and Kugel is part of that for all the reasons Matt said. But I like the small neighborhood ones, and if I were to do a second book, and if anybody wants me to do one, just let me know right afterwards. I would do neighborhoods. I found, traveling the state, I found a lot of communities where they either revived a brewery that died right after Prohibition, or they just have one because they feel like it's very important to the community and the community supports it. And so those to me are also craft breweries in the strictest definition.
Bill, you've had you're kind of the senior statesman here, so how do you define it now?
Craft brewer, so to speak. When I started, that term wasn't even used. You know, craft beer. It's kind of something that just came about. But honestly, I think it's just, you know, something that there's, you know, whenever the beer is being, you know, produced in such a way that a lot of honesty and hard work is kind of put into it, and it's not kind of marketed in a way to kind of trick you, you know, into believing that it's something it's not. I mean, that's kind of a big part of it, right? Is just you know, real credibility in the beer. I think there's a lot of, you know, larger breweries who do make, you know, some fantastic beers, and you know, at the end of the day, all of our businesses were kind of set out to grow and to, you know, to make more beer. How much beer exactly? I don't know if, you know, you can really set a limit to that. I mean, I'd certainly like to see my brewery grow, but you know, there's a limit to all of it, and to where you cross the line somewhere, it's gray. I don't know exactly where that is, but.
The rest of brewers, I mean, anybody else have like a different definition or way different from that, or thoughts about how you kind of define yourself as a craft brewery compared these days?
I guess I can chime in on this. I don't know that the size thing is particularly important to us. The whole cap of having 6 million barrels or less is like, you know, kind of absurd for any of us. Like, that doesn't matter much. To be traditional and use ingredients that are true to what we believe to make a good product, I think that's probably stuff that's important. End of the day, we're like, when we go to task about making a beer, making a new beer, writing a new recipe, or just performing everyday brewery operation stuff, it's more to us about, you know, having our hands on it and crafting something that we feel like we have like ourselves a part of, just like any artist would. And I think that, you know, when you use the word craft, that's, I think, at the heart of what we're trying to get at, is like, this is something that, yeah, consistency is important when we go to brand something, but end of the day, like, there's going to be small, very small, hopefully, inconsistencies with how everything's produced, because everything's done by hand. It's like, you know, it's the difference between having the original painting and having, you know, 10,000 of them reproduced. I mean, we're making the original every time. We're just doing our damnedest to make sure it's as close to the same every time around, and we're doing it by hand, and that's craft to us. And it's heart, it's soul, it's we give a shit. We really care with every step and intention and decision we make in the brewery about which valve do you open, or how you're going to clean this, or what keg are you going to put it in, or how many cans are you going to fill. Every bit of that, of every part of the liquid, matters to us, and it matters to everybody that's in the brewery. And that to us is craft, where it may get lost or may not in other breweries, large or small.
So Matt, as you were traveling the state, you had a unique behind-the-scene access to a lot of breweries. Is this something you see? I mean, I'm hearing the hard work, the crafting. Is this kind of what you saw in your travels?
Yeah, so I spent about 2 years working on the book, taking photos and actually getting it produced as well. And I was taking photos during production before the final photo was supplied. But traveling around the state, I guess one of the biggest trends that I first picked up was the hard work, which is directly fueled by the passion. And these guys, when I was going around, were kind of teaching me as I was taking photos of them about it. And sometimes I would ask because I didn't know what they were doing, and sometimes they would just tell me because they wanted to share what they were doing. And it was very fun to see that these people were there to brew, not there to make money and show up for a paycheck. So I noticed that, and then also that hard work was fueled by that passion that is causing generally old dudes in Wisconsin to quit their jobs and sink their 401ks or whatever they have, or their entire life into quitting and starting a brewery. So that was the second trend that I definitely picked up on. And yeah, this is Tom Porter, by the way, from Lake Louis Brewing Company, and he literally pulled away from his engineering job at an auto parts manufacturer and pulled his entire 401k and stuck it into Lake Louis Brewing Company out in the middle of Arena, Wisconsin.
Great dude.
Yeah.
Did you just call him old?
He's bald.
And some guys aren't even quitting their jobs. Guys at Noble Roots, you guys are working full-time jobs and running the brewery. Tell us a little bit about what made you decide that you wanted a second more than full-time job.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, brewing is tough work. It's super labor intensive. You know, we're the smallest brew system of the bunch, and it's an exceedingly manual process. And it's not always fun to be sitting at the bar, finishing up cleaning kegs at 11:30 yesterday, and then getting up for work the next day at 4 for the other job. But it really is fueled by passion, and you know, ultimately I'm not quite as, I'm a little more risk sensitive than quitting my job and sinking my savings fully in, but it's something that I think we all have the dream to do. But it's hard work, and all of us are doing it. You're sweating, you're lifting bags of grain. It's fun.
And being small like this, is this where that camaraderie is important? We're kind of helping each other out. Is kind of that way. I know Stillmank and Badger State, I hear you guys all the time talking about maybe you're out of can tops and someone needs to borrow some can tops for a little bit. Even like a while back, we did a video shoot in the Badger State parking lot of making hot dogs, and as I'm there, someone from Stillmank showed up, I think, to help you guys brew. I mean, you're like borrowing. Talk a little bit about that relationship and how important that is for you guys, Sam.
I got a bag of lactose in the back of my truck right now for Stillmank. So.
And we show up and help them brew all the time. So.
No, it's great getting feedback from each other and seeing and asking each other different questions and finding more and more about it. When we first started, we didn't know everything, and we still don't at all. And but then it also helps having a backup for ingredients. And
yeah, the partnership is awesome throughout everybody here in town. I mean, we've worked with and needed to work with everybody. I mean, we fall back on each other often and look forward to being able to help out anytime a need comes up if we can, because we know we're going to have to be the next guy to ask. So it's pretty cool.
And really, too, Copper State, you moved into the Hinterland building. It wasn't just like they were like, well, here you go, good luck. There was some help there, too, right?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of help, and there continues to be quite a bit of help, thankfully. I'm looking at John, our head brewers here, sitting in the front row. He didn't want to sit up on stage with us. But I vividly remember our first brew day after we took over the building from Bill. I don't think we got 20 minutes into the first brew before we were calling Joe Carls from Hinterland saying, Joe, this thing is making funny noise and it stopped working and we don't know what to do. And thankfully he's also up at 4 a.m. So he was quick on the fix and we're able to get moving.
And I think that camaraderie too, and that's not just here in Green Bay, that's Crest State. I mean, I'm sure that it's happening in Milwaukee too. And that sense of community too. In Milwaukee even, you talked a little bit about Miller and stuff, but talk about some of the craft breweries and those community impacts that's happening down in Milwaukee as well, Kathy.
So Milwaukee right now has 31 breweries and brew pubs. I'm expecting one more in 2 weeks and then another one at the start of 2018. So it's last year we had
20?
no. Well, yeah, about
Yeah.
that. So it's grown in leaps and bounds, and they help each other. I just wrote about Lakefront's 30th anniversary, and I used an anecdote from Kevin Wright at Third Space, which opened in 2016, and he was talking about how he had to fix something, and on one of his systems, and so he went to Russ Klisch at Lakefront, who said, "Oh yeah, I know how to do that. Here's my instruction book. Let me show you how to do it," because Russ does it at Lakefront, which is kind of a really big brewery to be doing your own boiler work. But that's how they work, and they have the Craft Brewery Alliance there. So many of the brewers in town got together. They meet once a month. They talk about breweries. They talk about how to get tourism there. They've decided to work together in most cases.
And you have something similar in Green Bay too. You have kind of a collaborative group. Is that right, Brad? Or am I
Well,
sort of?
Yeah, and other guys can definitely speak on this, but we get together a few times a year, especially in the spring, to put together a collaborative brew. Other guys maybe be able to talk about this better than I can, but yeah, we've got a great group here.
I think it's just the nature of the business, so to speak. We were kind of a different era when we started, and basically, you know, whether it was Russ at Lakefront or the guys at Milwaukee Brewing Company, or I mean, kind of everybody that's around the state. You know, the guys at Central Waters, we all share information. We all work together on certain things, and that's sort of the spirit of the business. I mean, there's certainly some people who don't like participate that way or want to make it, kind of go alone on certain things. But I would say by and large, everybody in the brewing community is wide open to sharing information, wide open to going in on a load of whiskey barrels or can tops or whatever it is that we're all trying to buy at the same time to just share on pricing and volume and so on and so forth. It works out better when you're helping each other out.
Yeah, raw materials, or Sam had mentioned it earlier. Like the fun part about brewing or being a brewer is that you never know everything. You want to, but there's so much to learn, and we're just every time you turn around, the dude next to you, literally in this situation, knows more about some particular thing than you do yourself. So it's a pretty cool resource to have as a community.
I think also, from an equipment and technology standpoint, I mean, if you would have polled Wisconsin brewers, 10 years ago, craft brewers anyway, probably not one of them would have had a centrifuge at that time. Somebody got the impetus to buy one and decided that it was something that was going to change their product or process, and then did it and actually shared all the kind of results with somebody else. And now I think that there's probably half the brewers in the state that are running larger centrifuges or and people seem to be buying them every day. So it's stuff like that. When somebody gets a hold of a certain piece of technology or whatever, it kind of spreads through the community pretty fast, and we try to help each other out and make basically to make better quality beer all the way through. So.
All right. So you can't have beer without the ingredients. Barley. Let's start with barley. It's kind of the backbone. All of that. You didn't just say the breweries, man. I mean, you were out in the fields. You were like everywhere. Where are we at with barley in terms of the state and producing that malt?
So Wisconsin used to be a major producer of barley back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it kind of shifted out west just because there's a better, more arid climate for growing it out there, and people were looking for ways to do it longer, get more out of it, and after Prohibition came, they were looking for cheaper ways to make light beer, and or trying to make the cheapest beer possible so that people would still buy it, but they're still paying for it. Anyways, I don't know where I was going with that, but right now, barley production is starting to come back to the state, which is good. We have the climate for it, and places like Central Waters Brewing Company are working with their neighbor who's 2 miles away. That's Bob Stuzinski, and he grows 20% of their grain bill, or for their entire year of brewing. within 2 miles of the brewery. And it gets malted in Chilton and comes back, and I think that's the shortest from field to brewery cycle that I've found so far. But
anybody up here can beat that? Anybody? Nope. All right.
But so I was like, okay, Bob Stuzinski is working with Paul Graham. They're friends and neighbors. They are just doing it because they want to work with each other. But then I go to this place or this company called Biddick, which is outside of Boscobel. They have fields in Blue River and all around Lancaster and everywhere. And they're a small company who works with another small company called Monsanto. And so they grow seeds for Monsanto, but when you look at them and see that they're starting to plant barley for malting purposes now, you don't think that that's just a neighborly thing. It makes business sense to them, and that's because Wisconsin's got a short growing season, and they can get more profit out of that barley if it goes on to become malt and then eventually a consumer product in beer versus just growing barley or maybe even just corn in general. So that was cool to see that the production is coming back to the state after it had left, and I think that was partly influenced by a barley shortage a while back, right?
So regardless of where it's growing, one of the biggest malt houses is Breeze. I mean,
Yep.
you go just about anywhere. I was down in Tampa last year, took a tour of Cigar City Brewing. There's bags of Breeze malt all over the place down there. I mean, they're everywhere. So for the brewers, what's it like having such a big central malter like that, literally just down the road from you guys? Is that an advantage for you guys at all?
Shipping wise, yes. I can call in an order and get it in 3-4 days. But no, we love Breeze. Good consistency. I use 99% of my barley through them. Yeah, love them. And they're coming out, and they give me good advice, good news like on up and coming new malts. So we have good feedback there. Yeah, just great company. I know the truck driver that fills our silo. He's the only one that's allowed to fill our silo because of other faults that other breweries have had. But they know us like our neighbor. It's great to have them.
Actually,
Go ahead.
so we also get probably 75% of our malt from Breeze. Fantastic company. Kind of taking off of what Matt was talking about, with barley coming back, we're probably going to start seeing craft maltsters in the state of Wisconsin. I have a friend of a friend that's in the early stages of planning, and that's, hop growing is starting to come back to the state a lot more than it used to. There's some big farms in the area, and that's probably the next step where we're going to start to see some craft maltsters that can bring us some new malted barley that can do some fun stuff for beer.
And Wisconsin tends to like that balance between the barley, really, the malt bill, really, in Wisconsin, I think. We like that balance a little bit more than maybe on the coast where it's all about the hops, right? Am I wrong in this, or what do you guys see from your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin folks are interested in hops and IPAs. I know they are. Sell a lot of them here. It's great. But we also have a tendency to like sweet as well, where old fashions go down pretty easy around this neck of the woods. And with that, for beer, it's malted barley before it is hops. So yeah, buying good quality, high quality malted barley from a producer that's 40 minutes away is really important to us. We also buy hops from local growers, but being able to get malt from Breeze is pretty cool. Like Sam's saying, like it's a couple day turnaround. Last week, literally, the customer service gal, she's like, I can get you most of your order, but there's going to be a couple 100 pounds that won't make it on this one because we're producing it like on Wednesday. She's like, my daughter's just had a kid, and she lives in Green Bay. I'll drive it up to you. And she did, and we're making beer with it the next day. It's like, it's fresh, and it's just it's neighbors. It's people watching out. Everybody's trying to help each other do better up here. And yeah, so it's important.
Anyway, since we started diving in on the hops a little bit, let's go there. it's not just a growth in Wisconsin, it's actually kind of a coming back in a way, if we do.
Yeah, so also in the 1800s, specifically the 1860s, Wisconsin used to be a major producer of hops, or the nation's largest producer of hops. And we went through a pretty huge boom and immediately a bust after a couple of years of producing 5-6 million pounds of hops in the state. And that was due to some diseases, and it kind of pushed production out west to Washington, where the nation's largest producer is currently. But we've had breweries double in the number of breweries in the state in the past 6 years. So these breweries are looking for local hops, and they're using local hops. And there's starting to be a little more production and maybe a couple acres here and there, but they're part of collectives and cooperatives where they're able to market their product as one and process it and get it ready for a brewery. And we definitely have the climate for growing it. So, and like I was saying earlier with the barley, in malt or hops case, there was actually a shortage of those a couple years ago as well, which drove up prices of hops and drove down the availability of them. And breweries in the state kind of looked at that and said, well, if that ever happens again, we can't get caught with our pants down. So let's work with some farmers and kind of seed them the money so that we can contract these harvests further out in advance. And then they can get it from a local producer instead of having to rely on Washington, who might have a warehouse fire that takes out 60% or whatever that number worked out to with a fire out there. But
I'm a little bit curious, brewers, if you're, what are the hops you guys are using the most of? If you just want to kind of, Bill, start with you, kind of.
We use the most probably of like Centennial, Simcoe, Hallertau, a bit of Columbus. Those are probably the primary hops. Citra, obviously. I think the hop thing is a little bit more complex than just like growing hops in the state, so to speak. I mean, it's great that there's some production coming back here, but so much of today's market is built around sort of like designer hops, I want to call them, or something. I don't know really what you call them, but the hot hop of the day. You know what I mean? Maybe it's Mosaic, maybe it's Citra. A few years ago, Simcoe. So it's brewers are really stressed to the point to get make certain beers or certain IPAs around certain hop varieties, and that's when it gets tough, because a lot of those are like patented hops by like YCH, Yakima Valley or whatever, and so it really makes the world a lot smaller in terms of going to the sources, and sometimes the price drives the price way up, and you have to kind of do your best to get a handle on it. I'm sure, I don't know if these guys do it at all, but we contract out like 6 years in advance for our usage, and to guarantee that we're going to have certain varieties available to us. Sometimes we overbuy, sometimes we underbuy, but it's kind of a hedging the bet, and it also keeps the price constant for in case of a period of drought or whatever. So.
Yeah, so we're kind of in the situation that Bill was describing. The hop we use most of is Citra, which is proprietary, but thankfully it's been really popular over the last 5 years or so. So there's a ton of acreage. We are looking towards bringing out some new beers with some local hops. We also made a terrible mistake about 2 years ago and planted like 40 Centennial plants on a small farm in Wrightstown. So that's a huge waste of our time, but it's actually fun. We can use it in a couple batches. It's more for the hell of it and for some marketing, but super labor intensive, not worth it.
So we do the same as Bill, and we contract our hops out also a couple years in advance. As far as the varieties go, probably Simcoe, Mosaic, Cascade. I use a lot of different hops, but as Bill was saying, the hop of the month, you got to be on top of your game, and if you really want to find that new hop out there, you got to be one of the first ones to discover it and get it cheap. Otherwise, you're left behind, and then prices are way high. We've quickly found that out. But yeah, Citra, let's see, Centennial. But some of those are the varieties I mostly use.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to add anything too much to the hop discussion. I mean, at the end of the day, the big hops they're big for a reason, right? People know them and they like them, and we know that we can move beer when we're using recognizable hops. That being said, we're obviously always looking for sort of the next thing. We stumbled upon a varietal out of Michigan that just happened to be called Copper, right? And we figured, heck, our name is Copper State. We may as well use a hop called Copper, and it actually turned out to be a decent hop. So we use that in a couple of our beers. To the whole discussion around whether it's hops or grain, right? If we can find local and it sort of passes the test of what we think our customers are going to enjoy in our beer, we're always looking to do that, right? Because we know from our customers that they appreciate local, and we're a small local brewery. We like it when people think local, and so we're always going to be looking for that. But at the end of the day, economics certainly plays a big part into how we approach the market, and so we're going to go with the things that we know that sell well at the same time that we keep watching for ways to buy local and use local.
And so I think we throw out Centennial, Citra, all that. Kathy, you're the translator of technical to the style. So talk a little bit about, when you're looking at a beer, how much do you look at the hops before you make a decision on drinking it, or is it because of the job? Well, I'm going to drink it, and which are there certain hops that you just find that if it's in this beer, I'm probably going to like it?
No.
No.
Actually, yeah. I'm not well versed on hops. I just, I now know after several attempts and practices like what a beer tastes like with Mosaic. And I had what's it called, Simcoe Devil, sitting around the house the other day, and my husband goes, "What? That's a weird name." And I go, "It means the hops." And then I realized that I was in trouble. But I'm actually judging a contest Friday night at UWM's fermentation certification program, where they're making beers based on prehistoric recipes and not using hops. They have to use plants that were probably around then, and I will let you know more about that.
All right.
So pre-hops, that's kind of an interesting thing. Pre-hops, there was a lot of like juniper berry, heather, different herbal things that were used. It wasn't really, the hops didn't really come into a ton of usage until people actually discovered that they had some kind of preservative quality and things like that. But there are still some beers made without hops as well.
All right. And of course, without you can have all the hops, you can have all the malt and everything in the world, but if you don't have water and yeast, you don't want to have any beer. In some ways, sourcing water locally is not a problem for Wisconsin at all. How are we uniquely set up compared to a lot of the rest of the country? Maybe we take it for granted.
Yeah, so yeast is the fourth ingredient that we haven't mentioned. Water, yeast, hops, and barley. Yeast is in the air. We do not have a producer in the state that creates yeast for breweries that I know of, but there's only 2 in the country, and breweries get it from those places, and then they propagate it and take it out generations. So not thinking about the yeast part, because we can probably source that if we were forced to. We have the largest or the greatest access to the world's largest source of fresh water in Wisconsin, which is something that California can't say, and they took a lot of heat when the drought was going on out there, and they're still using a lot of water in this water-intensive process of creating beer. And they actually helped out some breweries in Wisconsin in terms of reducing the amount of water that breweries use and bringing some new practices to them. But we have prime access to the world's largest source of fresh water, the climate to grow barley, the climate to grow hops, and we can figure out yeast. And we have 5 malt houses in the state, so I'm fairly confident that if Wisconsin were ever walled off from all the other states, we could self-sufficiently produce and meet the demand of our beer drinking population. So,
There's your good news for tonight.
Yeah.
But in some of the fun that comes in with the beers is what we call an adjunct. It's something that's not one of those four elements, and Wisconsin's pretty darn good at that as well.
And when breweries are, craft breweries specifically, are known for being very creative and taking risks with trying new recipes and adding different flavors into their beers. And when it comes to those ingredients that they're able to source locally, I've noticed a trend in Wisconsin with breweries sourcing them locally because they're small companies and they want to support other small businesses in the state. And so you can get honey locally, that's very regional. You can get cherries from Door County. Cranberries are pretty unique to Wisconsin. I mean, they're grown other places, but that's one of our bread and butters of the flavors. Yeah, it just kind of goes off into that. And the biggest one that I've noticed is coffee. Generally, every brewery is going to do a coffee stout or porter. And they work with local roasters to do that. And I have asked a couple of them, well, why don't you go to Walmart to get that? It would be cheaper, wouldn't it? And I hear from some of them, well, we can work with the roaster. They're a small business, but we can work with the roaster to actually develop a roast or way that we want the beer produced to meet the flavors of the beer that we're going after. So hits in that aspect, and also other aspects as well that
it creates great partnerships. I think Hinterland's Luna Stout, I mean, I think that's probably long-standing, one of the most popular beers for you guys. Talk about that relationship, how that's been, and even in terms of, like, I would imagine even cross-promotion too, right? I mean, you go to Luna, and there's Hinterland brand coffee roast on the shelf there as well.
Yeah, I think it started more out of just like the amount of coffee that I drink, you know, and Mark needing
To stay away.
keep feeding me. But, no, honestly, it was just kind of a you know, like Mark and I have been friends for a long time, and I always, you know, served his coffee in our restaurants, and that you know, we have a good relationship together, and it just, you know, was sort of like a natural progression, right? So he just started kind of working out a few different roasts for us to try. We originally brewed an Irish stout that we kind of started blending his coffee into, and slowly, like, just kind of changed the flavor profile of it until it was like just the right match. But yeah, I think that Joe, Carls, and Mark probably went through a lot of different batches of beer before they settled on exactly the right blend that they like. But yeah, it's been a huge beer for us for forever, and it is still growing.
You ramp it up quite a bit, the stovepipe. Like, how much coffee you put in, like, stovepipe compared to, like, the regular Luna Stout?
It's considerable amount more. So well, let's see if I can put it into terms. Luna Coffee Stout has about 1 pound per barrel. Stovepipe, I think, is right about 10 pounds per barrel. So it's like the amount of stovepipe that we just released was 500 pounds of coffee. So it's a lot. And it's horrible to try to cold brew that much coffee.
So you're cold brewing the coffee.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Brad, you worked with a local roaster here as well, right? With your Perky Porter, which has actually become your number 2 beer at Stillmank right now, or?
Yeah, Perky does well for us, for sure. And just like Bill's talking about, dealing with the coffee, we don't cold brew ours. We put our coffee right into the beer. But nonetheless, it's a pain in the butt to get out of the tank after, you know, to clean up after. It does make for a really fun relationship, though, with another local business. It's just one more local connection we can have. Like similar things that Bill's talking about. I mean, they're selling our coffee with our name on it in their place. I mean, it's just it's cool to have that connection. It's just another good partnership to have. Part of why would we not go down to Walmart and get the coffee, because certainly it'd be cheaper. Well, yeah, you don't have the local connection, but again, going back to what Bill's talking about, when we're designing a recipe for a beer, we're designing it so that we think it's going to go and work well with the type of coffee that we're putting into it. But if we just take something off the shelf and toss it into the beer we think is right, we like the beer that we've got, and we can adjust it if we need to, but having the ability to also adjust the type of roast and the type of beans and where they're coming from and the flavor we get out of them, because we've got this local connection, really is what makes the beer as a brand and itself work and the local connection work. So, and that's really why, again, it's fun to be a craft brewer. So.
And Copper State, I'm guessing you had one source for your coffee in mind from the start?
Yeah, we know a guy. It helps that one of our business partners owns a coffee shop and has been doing his own roasting now for probably about 12 years. He has been sourcing all of his own beans and creating all of his own roasts. So it's been fun. We probably end up putting coffee into more beers because of that than we would normally. Sometimes we end up with happy accidents that end up becoming really good sellers for us. So yeah, it's been a great relationship.
Kathy, is this just a uniquely Green Bay with this kind of amount of coffee as you're traveling? I mean, you got out to a lot of different places. Is this one of the more popular adjuncts, or where's some of the?
It's funny. I was talking to somebody today about how breweries became so popular in Milwaukee again, and we were talking about the farm to table movement and the new restaurants that Milwaukee has that they didn't have 10 years ago, and how that follows. And then he said, and also coffee shops. And I was like, you're right. I mean, that's the crafts part of it. Farm to table is craftsman, coffee is crafting coffee, and then beer is crafting. And so there are some relationships. Third Space does a beer made with Stone Creek, which is essentially down the street from them. Lakefront has Fuel, their Fuel brand. I mean, Collectivo has always had sold beer and been part of beer. So it's been a long time relationship in Milwaukee.
In traveling around, so beyond the coffee, beyond like hunting and that kind of stuff, what were some of the weirder, not just in Milwaukee, but as you're doing your work in your book and trying some beers, what were some of the weirder adjuncts or weirder things you saw people trying in their beers?
You know, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but one of my very favorite beers, that for a while, I obsessed for a little while on a beer, but Third Space made an IPA with ghost pepper. I love ghost pepper. I didn't know I would like it in beer. I don't like it any other way but in beer. And I you know, the thing is, Pilsners, there's no forgiveness in there. If you screw it, the same with lagers, you screw it up, you screw it up. But if you're going to throw ghost pepper into something, you can hide a myriad of sins, I'm pretty sure. I maybe not, but turns out I really like ghost pepper in beer.
Sam, you guys still have the small, you're able to do a lot of like small batch, you got a lot of taps there, you guys doing a lot of experimentation. What are some of have you ever shot down ideas from some of your fellow mates as far as what you're even going to try in a beer, or what are some things that maybe you try and you're like, I can't believe this actually worked?
I've used peanut butter, dried powdered peanut butter. I've used cranberry. Let's see. What other?
You used that one thing that one time.
We made a couple braggots, half mead, half beer. That takes a lot of honey there. What else? Elderberries, that didn't work so well. But that's what the experimental pilot system is there for, is just experiment and see what happens and see if you can come out with that hot new beer that's going to excite everyone. But yeah, but coffee, of course, the main seller right there. I got something in the works, hopefully soon. I'm going to be using grape with peanut butter, so stay tuned for that. Sneak peek.
Kathy, I'm surprised you didn't say the oyster goes from Company Brewing, where they used oysters.
And I also did not mention the cricket flour chocolate cricket beer that Water Street Brewery did last year before the fair.
Ugh.
I drank it.
Was it good?
It tastes like chicken.
Okay.
It tastes like chicken. I couldn't taste the crickets.
Okay, so through the brewing process, got the adjuncts, got everything in there, but there's some byproducts there too. Looking through the book, you're out at farms. I've seen they're shoveling off spent grain. That seems to be another kind of trend thing, or another way that these brewers are working.
Yeah, so after grain makes its way from the field through the maltster to the brewery, breweries throw that into warm water, and they essentially break down the starches into sugars, and then that sugar water goes on to become beer. It's wort. That goes on to become beer, and after they've extracted the starches or broken down pulled out the sugars, you have grains that are left over that are sugarless, and breweries really have no use for them. So they're looking for ways to get rid of it, and usually they partner up with a local farmer to come by and pick it up because it's still got nutrients, it still has protein in it that you can feed to livestock, and you can even work it back into the soil as well as a nutrient-rich compost. But that was one of the coolest things that I found out when I was following the brewing process was, okay, now I need to go to a farm and watch these cows eating it. But I think, what were you saying from Noble Roots about your spent grain farmer?
Yeah, we've got a family friend that has a hobby farm that comes picks it up every day after we brew, and the day after he feeds them the spent grains, they apparently always turn their nose up to the regular feed, and for some reason they have an affinity for the spent grain from our Midnight Confection, which is our chocolate stout.
That's interesting, because the guy that picks up Lake Louis spent grain said that they like pale malts instead of darker stout and porter roasts. So yeah.
Picky cows.
Also, beyond just like being able to feed those nutrients and fulfilling part of the regular TMR that a farmer might generally feed to their cattle or just livestock in general, beyond just cows and chicken and sheep and anything you can name, it's more palatable to the animals, like he was just saying. Also, it is already in its fermentation process, so it's more digestible for these cows as well. So it makes sense, especially for like South Shore Brewery, who contracts their barley producer, who grows the barley, and then they malt it, and then they bring it through South Shore, and then South Shore just ships it right back to that same farm, and they feed it to their cows, and then those cows go out and shit in the field, I think. But
I'm totally going to forget their name, but there is a brew pub in Wisconsin. I'm trying to think of it, but they use the spent grain to make pizza dough. Moonridge, yeah. I knew it was Moon something. And then also people make dog biscuits that way. I mean, that's become almost a new craft in itself.
Yeah, so along the dog lines, for anybody in the crowd that might be an aspiring home brewer, our test lab was in my basement for a long time before we got started, and we forgot to seal up the spent grain once, and my dog came down, and turns out dogs love spent grain, which is great, right? Didn't have to feed him that day. The problem was he had to go outside every hour on the hour for literally the next week. I mean, it was horrible. So just know what you're getting into. Dogs love it, but maybe in moderation.
Everything in moderation, right? So beyond the byproducts too, we were talking about farm to food, but there's a lot of factory aspects to this as well, with converting dairy products, or some of that knowledge that we have of dairy production working its way into craft brewing. There's all these different aspects I think you kind of came across, Matt, that maybe you weren't expecting to find as you were setting out to do this book.
yeah, I found out that the dairy industry can play an effect with local breweries, not only in converting used dairy equipment into brewing kettles and fermenters, but also because we are a huge dairy state and we have equipment manufacturers that produce sanitary stainless steel equipment for transporting and storage of milk, which directly translates into another food product, which you could consider to be beer. And they're starting to find new markets, and there's a company that was even just spurred off of a company that produces beverage containers for all industries. They just split off to do specifically craft beer, and they've grown quite a bit, and they have a facility in Marshfield and also down in Pewaukee. So they're picking up a lot of contracts along with that. Our publishing industry in the state, breweries don't have to look very far if they're looking for six-pack carriers or boxes to get their bottles and cans out into the market. This is Green Bay Packaging. Who was saying that they used them earlier for? So Badger State and Stillmank and Hinterland all use Green Bay Packaging in Wausau. Oh, yours is in Green Bay? Okay. Central Waters and Capital Brewery and Stevens Point and Port Huron Brewing Company all use the one in Wausau. Same company, different location.
And actually, one thing too, I know Brad, we had talked about this, and I think maybe you guys do it too, at Badger State, but you have almost like a wood veneer on some of the bottles. For a while, you were doing that, and that was a local project you worked with.
Yeah, that was a project that came through Wausau, actually. Yeah, it was a wood veneer thing, right? Yep. Cool label.
Wait, you were saying you used the local digicopy for your last setup, right? Nice.
Nice single apply labels. Our labelers are right in the crowd. They got to go through every bottle one at a time.
All right. I hope they got to drink some beer too. So you got the dairy industry and publishing industry, which have been huge in Wisconsin, but also for a while our third biggest industry in the state was brewing and malting. And because of that, there are a lot of companies in the state that have cropped up to fill the niches that breweries need when it comes to clamps to connect hoses to equipment. Those are made down in Milwaukee. Also down in Milwaukee is Ace Chemical, who creates the chemicals for cleaning and sanitization so that you can make a consistent product very consistently. Their big customer is Miller, but they're starting to find new markets and people throughout the state that they can get their product to as well because of craft beer. And we have the nation's largest tap handle manufacturer in Random Lake, Wisconsin. They produce 500,000 tap handles a year out of a town of about 3,000 people. So does anyone get their tap handles from AJS? One? All right. So I asked the president of that company, how has craft beer really affected your growth as a tap handle manufacturer? And the president was like, well, in 2011, we had 60 breweries or 70 breweries, and in 2016, we had 147. Our company grew from 24 employees to 50 employees over that same time span, and they doubled their manufacturing space. So that was fun to go by and take photos of them creating tap handles for all these companies in the state and also companies outside the state as well. But while they were doing it, they were expanding their production floor while it's coming through. And when you have a doubling in breweries, you have 70 breweries in the state that are looking to either move into a facility and convert it into a brewing space, like Fermentorium used to be a dog store, a pet.
It was a pet store. They don't like you to say that, though.
Oh, I didn't say that.
Okay.
We're not on Facebook or anything, are we?
No, it was a pet store.
Yeah, let's just, and Brad, where Stillmank Brewing is now, it was what?
Yeah, we converted a builder's supply warehouse. So it's like old school Home Depot, indoor lumber yard, turned it into a brewery.
And at Copper State, you had the difficult journey of transforming a brewery into a brewery.
Yeah, the brewery part was definitely tough.
Sam, you guys are at?
It was a manufacturing company, metal fab company beforehand, vacant for a while.
We were a vacant window tinting shop.
We were a brownfield.
There was a couple of ugly gas stations
Yeah,
there.
something, I
and,
don't know.
some other stuff. But what was, when you first moved into Hinterland, what was it, your first location downtown, what was it, a meat packing?
Yeah, it was built for Swift Meat Company, like right around the turn of the century.
Yeah, so I guess what I was saying was you have all these breweries that are either converting spaces into a brewery or building a brand new one. So there's a lot of contractors that are involved, and you don't really source those outside of the state necessarily when you're looking for a mason or an electrician or anything to even do the conversions of your tap room so that it's still a brewery, but now it's Copper State Brewery, not Hinterland's tap room, where they used to serve like super fancy food. I don't know if you serve food, so I didn't want to.
We do.
All right, I'm hungry.
And it's kind of super fancy too.
A different kind of fancy, I would say. And architects and all the different contractors that are involved in using those has also played an effect into the growth of the economy, I guess, or the impact of craft breweries on the economy in the state. So, yeah.
There's a map
These are-
of Matt and Kathy's journey.
That's just the 130 locations that are in my book. I went to more than 130 locations. I didn't go to all the locations in the state. Kathy was probably at more breweries than me for her book. But you can see it's definitely got a footprint visually throughout the state and where all these places are located. But
Kathy, visiting these, what were some of the threads? What were some of the more memorable ones that kind of jumped out at you as you're going through the state?
I'm looking up, and she's not there anymore. Allison Rolfe just went to Earth Rider, which opened last week up in Superior, but I love the sours she made at Thirsty Pagan in Superior. So when I was deciding how to do it, because nobody said, this is how you should write this book. They just said, write it. So I was trying to decide how to do it, and we just started at the top and went down. So, you see Thirsty Pagan at the very top, and then you go down to Potosi, which is near Iowa, and over and around. So it was interesting, and there were some that I didn't go to because I didn't know they were there. Skeleton Brew Crew. It's in Alaska.
okay.
They're in the book. I called them after I heard they were there, but I didn't get there. My friends were there last weekend. They said it was good. So it's just amazing. I mean, the whole state is dotted with breweries that would be hidden. Bloomer is a good example of a community brewery. He wanted to bring back the brewery after Prohibition. He found some recipes. He has like a 178-year-old well where he lagers his beer, and the community backs him. And I don't know. I hadn't been to Bloomer before. Maybe everybody here has, but I was just surprised.
That's kind of what, and that's a lot, it kind of brings us full circle talking about craft beer and that community, like Bloomer, even Potosi, I mean, kind of centers around that too. And it doesn't have to be a big town. How big is Bloomer? Like, roughly?
Nothing. Well, the New Glarus is probably a really good example of a small town with a big brewery, where people rally around it. Potosi is, 800 people? You wouldn't know it.
So, talking about the beer, I mean, I think a lot of times people want to know what's kind of the limit. Right now, craft beer is about 10% of the total beer consumed in this, roughly, give or take. But it's still a big impact, right? I mean, that's not like, you say 10%, you think, well, it's not, but you're talking like, 1.7 billion they figure, or something like that as economic impact, or?
Yeah, so my slides are out of order at this point. We're going to do
You're drunk.
Oh,
a
okay, that's
pitch
right.
for
We were supposed to
Kathy,
do
and
that,
then-
she did talk about her book, and we
See.
talked about it a little bit.
where do you buy your book, Kathy?
There's my book. You can buy your book. This website will take you to where you can buy your book, or I have some out in the hall. Or, I can give you my number. I'll send you one. But that's the website for it.
Yeah, and Kathy's book is completely different than mine, and we do not step on each other's toes at all when it comes to sales.
Sometimes we were right behind each other.
Yep.
In the process, like I went City Lights. That's what I remember the most, where they have this. The brewery has a tower, and I went up there and I heard a bird run into a wall, and I came right back down. And the next thing I hear is Matt is way up in the rafters at the top of this tower. He's a little less scared of birds than me.
Birds were up there. I didn't see them, but I know they were up there.
They were dying. They were just like funk,
Yeah,
and then they
that's how I know
die.
they're
I'm
up
like,
there.
I'm not going there.
I thought it was really fun to run into you at New Glarus, and we had no clue. And then all of a sudden, Deb Carey and I walk into the tap room, and you're standing there with your travel companion.
Drunk?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't drunk.
You would never know.
I hide it.
Yeah, so her book is more travel guide and telling you where to go and what types of beers, and it's more of something you'd want to build a trip around, whereas mine is more along teaching you about the people in the community and everything. But the reason behind the book was, well, what was the reason behind yours, by the way?
Oh, the publisher called and asked me to write it.
Okay.
They're
fair
a
enough.
regional publisher, and they've done this book everywhere, but they hadn't done Wisconsin for beer, which seems like a shame. Also, I have a little itty-bitty picture of myself in Matt's book. He was kind enough to put it in. I think it's from the first time we met.
Yep.
Cool.
And you were totally freaked out that I had a camera.
Yes.
I'm just gonna let you go ahead because I completely got out of
Yeah.
sync.
Oh,
I'm just
all right.
gonna let you fix my mistake.
Anyways, so here's a statistic that is crazy in the state. 91.5% of all beer that is brewed by a craft brewery in the state is consumed in Wisconsin. But that only makes up 10% of the beer that's consumed in Wisconsin. And so when I was going out and seeing all these breweries that were committed to working with their local partners and helping each other out, I just thought it was crazy that 138 breweries, when they pulled this number, could create $1.75 billion of economic impact in our state. And they're only creating 10% of the beer that is being consumed. I think we're going to ask you guys what kind of challenges are there, and how are you going to, or in process of overcoming the volume aspect of beer? Or are you sitting comfortable in a space where it's potentially still growing, and we're reaching into the 73% of the beer that's owned by 2 companies in our country?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, there's obviously more room for growth for craft beer in our state. I think the best example of that is New Glarus. I mean, they've grown and grown and grown. I don't know what they're at, 120,000 barrels, something. I mean, that's a pretty large brewery. But Wisconsin drinks a lot of beer, you know, and thank God for that. But we're I think all of us are poised to grow a bit, and where everybody ends up, who knows? But there's definitely more market share to come. I would say for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You know, being again sort of the new kids on the block, we're still in that figuring the market part out, and a lot of our friends and family know it, and so we're asked all the time, like, hey, how are things going up at the brewery? And my first answer is always, well, it turns out the people of Wisconsin like beer, right? And I don't see that changing anytime soon. There's a lot of growth in this market, and what's interesting to me, as we were getting started, I got involved with a program down in Milwaukee, actually called the Barley to Barrel program. It's for aspiring brewers. We were probably a little bit farther along than most of the people in that class who were just getting started brewing out of their basement, and we were opening a brewery at that time. But one of the things that program opened up for me was just seeing from a lot of communities around Milwaukee, there are actually communities that look and see a brew pub or a small brewery being the centerpiece of new economic growth for their community, right? So this is we obviously hope there's a lot of growth, but there are literally cities out in Wisconsin that are saying, no, if we want to grow next, if we want to be the next popular place, right, as we're looking at our development program, we need to put a brewery here because they see what a local brew pub or that local presence does for them. It just creates a sense of community, and it turns an area into a vibrant. I mean, you look at Milwaukee and the growth there in the Third Ward, out in the Menominee Valley. I mean, the brew pubs that have ended up there they've drawn people to places that they weren't necessarily going before, and it's a really cool thing to see.
One thing I'm kind of interested too is there's that challenge of shelf space if you're distributing. How important is distribution now compared to having that just great place where people come to? I know Roots right now, you guys, if you guys want to bottle something, you're bottling it by hand, literally. Is that something you see yourself wanting to get into, or where are you guys at in terms of future for you?
I mean, eventually, yes. I mean, if you look at, we're at 5,200, 5,500 breweries in the U.S. now, and a good chunk of the last 2,000 that have opened are a lot like us. They're small and extremely taproom focused. We have a decent amount of distribution accounts around Green Bay and up into Door County, but we still do a majority of our volume across the bar. And that's how we like it. We get to interact with our customers. As of right now, when you walk into the tap room, you're going to see one of the owners there serving you the beer and talking through what you're experiencing. So that's where a lot of the growth is right now. And I think, it's a great way to connect with your consumers and grow your brand.
The distribution model is something that, like, if you're a small brewer and you look at it, it's probably the hardest nut to crack. There's no doubt about it. And really the profit that comes as a result of selling beer wholesale is very small compared to what you get over a bar or tap room situation like that. And I don't think a lot of people really realize, but as a guy who spent the last 22 years really trying to crack that nut, it's hard to really put that into perspective. But it kind of breaks down like this: if you're selling a barrel of beer wholesale, you can expect about $225 per barrel in revenue, right? That's like top line, not top line, not bottom line. It breaks down to about $1,100 per barrel on beer served across the bar. So it's quite a bit more profitable, obviously, to just open a tap room or a brew pub or whatever and sell your beer and forget about the rest. But I think it's kind of interesting because as brewers, I think that's where our curiosity draws us to. We all kind of have this dream of running this production factory and running all these machines. At least I do. I don't know. I'm kind of obsessed with the production end of it. I just like the bottling and canning machines, and I like working on them and seeing them go. But it's definitely not like the smartest business decision to make to open a production brewing facility at all, really. The best thing would be just do what you're doing and sell it across the bar. I wasn't that smart though. I started the production facility first and then later added the bar. Kind of figuring out as I go along.
There's also a growth curve to it as well that's important to take into consideration. And there's no doubt that you can make better dollars per barrel over the bar. But if you can grow your business to a point in which that you can actually produce enough beer to sell to market and figure out the distribution nut for whatever that is, then you get over a certain hurdle and all of a sudden the economies come back on your side too, to some degree. And it is like running the machines and all this, that is kind of why you're doing it. That's the fun. That's the crafting side. That's what I'm talking about. When we're deciding what to do and how to do it and enjoying those decisions. But if you can get all that stuff right and you can get your production numbers to a point, you can actually make some real good money that way too and still enjoy your bar. So there's all these different ways to do it, and that's why you're seeing all these different breweries open up with different models right now, because everybody's got a different passion or way to skin the cat on this one.
And speaking of different ways of doing things, you asked Kathy what her reason was for doing the book. Ultimately, what made you, like you said, probably more than 30,000, maybe 60,000 miles driving. How many photos did you think you?
I took 30,000 photos for the book. Yep.
30,000 photos.
That's when I counted it in 2016 at one point.
What made you do this, and ultimately, did that impact your decision on how this book went together?
Well, interestingly enough, I have slides prepared for that question.
No way.
So when I realized that there was that much impact coming from that many breweries, and we have so much more growth to come, and you have 2 breweries in the nation that are producing 73% of the beer, and they're not even owned in the U.S., and then you have 5,300 breweries that are fighting over 12% of the market nationally. I wanted to look at that I came from a marketing or an advertising agency, and I kind of put my lens on it, what are they doing wrong? And not necessarily that breweries specifically are doing it wrong, but there's this kind of feeling, if you're not in craft beer, that it is for hipsters and people that want to talk about hops all day and walk around with beards, which happens. But there's also these hardworking people in our community that care about our community and work with companies within the state or as locally as they can find them, if it's possible, to give money back into the community and keep it local. Whereas if you go and buy a Bud Light, which 1 in every 5 beers bought in the U.S. right now is a Bud Light, do you think those profits stay here, or do they go to Belgium where they're owned by AB InBev? Or if you're going to buy Miller and that isn't even owned by Miller anymore, it's owned by Molson Coors in Canada. So that's what I want to show the people behind the scenes.
So let me comment on that for just a second. As we were getting started with our company, and this speaks to what all these guys are doing, because we're all doing similar things, but 82% of every dollar we spent stayed in Green Bay first, and then if not in Green Bay, it was in Wisconsin as we were getting going. And everybody I know is on the same page with that. That's why what we're doing, or why we feel like we're a contributor to here, not anywhere else, not even outside of the state of Wisconsin. That's really important to us and what we do. It's all about, if our business is growing right now and we can turn those dollars around and help grow our community, we're doing the right thing by what we're doing as a business, as a craft, as a brewery here, right? The other thing is too, is that we're not 5,020 breweries or whatever it is competing for the 12% of share. I don't want his tap line. I want that Bud Light tap line, right? So when we're going, and we're looking for the 88% of what's available. And we're hoping that first you enjoy our product because we worked hard and we enjoy it, you know, but also what you're buying when you make a decision at a bar or at the grocery store or wherever, you're making that decision on one, yeah, I want to drink that because I'm excited about the way it tastes, but I also know those dollars are staying here. That's really important to us.
And supporting someone that works at a tap handle factory.
Totally. Tap handle factory, Brees, Green Bay Packaging. I mean, I can't go down the line. It all comes from here. You mentioned Marshfield. Those guys make our tanks.
Yeah.
I mean, big purchases to small purchases, they all happen here in Wisconsin. And we've got the industry to support it because Wisconsin, we grew up on beer.
He said it way better than I could show it in photos, but with that and the intent to get the point across about companies keeping and working with companies local and keeping the money here, I couldn't go out and do a book and not keep it here. So or the production of it, especially with our huge publishing industry in the state. So it is way cheaper to get something printed in China, even after you ship it halfway around the world and get it into bookstores in the state. Definitely way cheaper, but we are able to in Wisconsin, and I was able to keep all the manufacturing of the book within the state. And I had never done a book before, so the first place I looked for was my Milwaukee counterpart who designed the book, who came from the advertising industry as well and is in design, but luckily he knew nothing about creating a book as well, because he would have quit before we even got started had he known all the effort that was involved in paring 30,000 photos down to the final 400 that are in the book, and making decisions about every single page and every single spread and how that looks in comparison to the spread that was before it or the one that comes after it, how it tells the story. And I was so immersed in meeting all these people and learning everything about the state that I would say, all right, there's so much cleaning. How much cleaning is involved in brewing? Like,
That's all we do.
80, 90%. So it's like, Chris, we need to put 80 to 90% of the pages have to be cleaning. Like, that's representative of the industry. And here are 16 photos of people spraying the floor. And he's like, we're not putting those on a page. We're picking one. And I was like, no. I know these guys, and I know these guys. And this would be really cool. This is a good photo, too. And he's like, yeah. One photo. And we would just fight in all the time that he wasn't working at his job to pare it down. to tell his story, and I knew all that, and he knew nothing about it, but he liked drinking beer. So we took two different heads and created something that is approachable for people that are in the industry. Might not learn anything about it, but see more of the companies, even though you already know that you're working with them, or people that don't know anything about beer at all. They can figure out the process and how those products make it from the field into the actual glass that you're drinking out of. We have reached sales pitch territory, by the way. Anyways, I told Chris this book needs to sell based on the cover alone. And he's like, all right, well, which photo are we going to use? I'm like, we can't use one photo to encapsulate the entire book. It has to look good on a coffee table for a long time. We're going to do leather and gold foil stamp, and we're going to imprint it as well. And he's like, all right, cool. So he created his design, and then all of a sudden he was like, I couldn't find a font that I wanted for the beginning of the book, so literally went out and created a font for the book that gets used throughout it, and hand drew it, and then scanned it into his computer, and then made some edits to it, and we use that throughout the book, including like book intro territory, where I rewrote the book intro as a non-government warning, and then I found a label manufacturer in La Crosse, Inland Label. And so they produced labels for it, and I called them up and was like, would you do this for the book? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. How many do you need? And I was like, one. And they said that was way below their minimum order. But then they were cool with working with me and wanted to be a part of the project, so they created them and sent me 20 because that's as many as they could get out before they could like flip the switch off on the machine. And then we took a photo of it and placed it in instead of writing it out and typing it out on the page. And then one of the last photos of the book is a neon sign that says cheers as a way to like kind of cap it off. And I found out that there's a neon sign manufacturer in Antigo, Wisconsin. And I walked up there, I drove up there, 4 hours, and got into Antigo, walked into the manufacturing facility, and there were 40 people silently bending neon around their stations, and all you could hear was the little hum of the Bunsen burner that they were bending the glass on. So it was pretty surreal to walk into a manufacturing facility, especially after being in Green Bay Packaging and all these other places, and all of a sudden it's dead quiet. So I got that sign, brought it back home, and took a photo of it in a window with all my friends drinking in the background for the final shot. This is one point that I have to really thank the brewers in the state, and also the ones on stage, or the entrenched ones on stage. I found the biggest hurdle in creating a book is not in the design of it, but in the production of it, and needing money to print and get money for pages and binding and everything. So all the people I talked to that I thought had money or banks were just like, no, you've never done a book before. Just do a Kickstarter and they'll give you money. And I was like, I'm not doing that. That's stupid and it's cheap. And then I got really desperate last year, right before Christmas, and went and did this Kickstarter. And in 15 days, I raised $15,000, which was half of my goal at that time. And I thought I wasted the entire time, but really what I found out from that, and if you know nothing about Kickstarter, you don't get any of that money if you don't reach your goal in the time that you raised it in. But I didn't even have it set up yet. Brad Stillmank and Aaron Stillmank just donated money to it in a large sum that wasn't even related to the amount of books that I was telling people they could buy them for. And I was like, oh, the brewers in the state might get behind this. So I spent about 5 more months traveling around the state, going to breweries and trying to raise the funds for this book. And by March of this year, I had got enough breweries to give me checks that I was going to cash at a later date. And then I was going to send out an email a week before that I cashed them. And I sent it out and nobody sent anything back. So I put it straight into production, which also stayed in the state. And are you from Green Bay? I'm assuming that was a stupid question. We're in Green Bay. How many people work in an office in Green Bay? Have you ever thrown paper away or recycled it? That paper made its way to Fox River Fiber, who gets recycled paper from offices and shredded paper from 50-mile radius of Green Bay, and they pour it into a vat and mix it with water and create these soluble fibers, and then send it through 12 different processes that pull out the inks and staples and chewing gum that you stuck on that piece of paper, and get these white fibers, which were sent down to Appleton Coated. So Appleton Coated created the final product for it, which got shipped straight back up to Green Bay to Van Lanen printers, where they printed the books. And I learned a little bit about the process and got in everyone's way, and made some friends along the way. But I got all the first shift guys who were working on my book to come over to Stillmank afterwards. And Tom's on the left, and when I first met him, I was like, Tom, what do you drink? And he's like, I'm a Bud Light guy. And I was like, all right, well, when I have the book, can we go to the nearest brewery, which is Stillmank, and maybe you can try a different one, and then check out the book. And he's like, I could maybe find my way over there. Where he was pouring beer out of a barrel-aged beer, which is the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to Bud Light or what else. And he enjoyed it. So I already converted one person with the book, and I was still distributing it. And the pages, after they got printed, they made their way down to Germantown, where Rindell Bindery is located, and they're one of the last binderies in the Midwest, and they're family owned. And I say that because their credentials, and it also meant something when it came to the end of the book, because they pulled all the pages together, sewed them together, bound it, and then put it into the hardcover. And when they were rolling off the line, Dave Rindell, who's the owner, said, Matt, these are beautiful. We should shrink wrap them to protect them. And I was just like, okay, well, how much is that going to cost? And he's like, well, it's going to cost this. And I was like, well, I just spent all my money on production, so thanks for telling me earlier. And he thought about it, and he said, thank you for using us for this project and keeping it within the state. Even though it's more expensive, and we're very proud to be a part of it, so we'll just shrink wrap them for you. So they threw that in on top of the services, and that's not something that I would have got if I were emailing someone in China and they said, oh, you need to shrink wrap these? And I was like, yeah, maybe. And they're like, well, you get what I was saying. They wouldn't have thrown it in. They would have just shipped them and ruined the books before they even got here to Wisconsin. But then I threw the books, the shrink-wrapped books, into my boxes that were produced at Green Bay Packaging, the Wausau unit, and started driving around the state delivering the books that the breweries ordered, so that they could sell them in their tap room and make back the money that they put into it. So when people say, oh, where do you buy your book? The first place I usually say when the brewers are listening are in the brewery tap rooms. No, I say that as well when you're not listening, but in the brewery tap rooms, because they actually seeded the project that I was doing.
The local part, or the shrink wrap part of your story is important, though. I mean, the fact that we keep it within a said group of people that we work with means we get a higher quality product because of it. Whether it costs your supplier a little bit more to give you a better product, because you've got that relationship, you know each other, and there's a common goal on this. It's the same with why we're buying all these local products too. I mean,
and does it cost more?
You get a better product because.
Does it cost more when 83% of your dollars are going back into the community, whereas maybe like 2% of them are staying in your community if you buy a beer that's made in St. Louis, for example? Like Schafly is okay, but anyways. While I was distributing the books, I also grabbed a growler from the first brewery that I was at, and I brought it to the next brewery, and that brewery filled a growler for me to bring to the next brewery, and I made it through the entire state, delivering growlers of beer from the brewery that I was at prior to the brewery that I was delivering books to, which was awesome. I got to Brees in Chilton, though, and they didn't have beer, so that was a little snag in the plan, but they gave me a bag of malt, which I brought to the next brewery, who appreciated it way more than beer from another brewery. And then I got the third copy of that came off the line, signed by everyone that was in it or contributed to the production of it as well. Now I'm a salesman, and if you want a book, I will happily facilitate the transaction of that afterwards outside those doors to the back. So they're $45, and Kathy's book is...
They're $19.95, but my next book will be all local, I promise. It will tell you local things, many local. I'm local, so there you go.
They're companions.
Yeah.
They work together. And then I think you were gonna...
I was gonna say, Matt and I, we spent all afternoon together hashing out how this was gonna all come together. So we're gonna finish today over at Copper State. Have a couple of beers over there, so everybody wants to continue the conversation once these guys get done selling any copies, signing, all that kind of stuff. So you can buy their books here. You can buy all their beer right in town here at various spots around town. I highly encourage that as well.
And Copper State actually has beer from all the breweries that are on the panel as well, on their taps as well.
Yeah, that's correct. If you're going to join us, just head to our upstairs bar. We've got everybody on tap there. We'll be waiting for you.
All right. We got a bit of a late jump, so if we want to go another 5 minutes, we could take a few questions from the crowd. If anybody's dying to ask a question out there, do we have a website for your book?
Oh, the website, if you're on Facebook Live, would be www.stateofcraft.beer. Not .com. Just type in .beer. It's a URL. It's very confusing to a lot of people, including myself sometimes.
It's very confusing.
Yeah, you think it's going to be a quicker way of like typing out your email, and I'm all about concise words and everything, but that is a pain and a struggle to.
That's why mine is just wisconsinbeerbook.com.
Man, I wish I would have grabbed that one.
All right, we got a question right here.
Just curious if any of you know, I've seen some pictures of people drinking beer at taverns back in the late 1800s. And it looked like the beer they had in their mugs was dark. Is that the kind of beer they made back then, or was it just a lager?
These weird styles that you're seeing today aren't weird styles. They've been around for centuries. Prohibition has just changed our taste because of the shakeout of the breweries that existed afterwards and trying to create a cheaper product that people would still buy. Because you wouldn't stop buying stout, or you wouldn't stop buying beer if all that was available was a light lager. You would just start buying that, even though you might prefer a stout before that. So there are styles that also existed that aren't being brewed.
Like a Doppelbock.
No. Doppelbock. Do you guys, what are the kinds that they're brewing that you're going to be testing at your event next week?
An amber lager, so that's darker in color right there. So,
And in Wisconsin especially, I've noticed, and you guys can probably speak to this, that there is a pretty good love for, at least up around this area, brown ales, amber ales, stouts, porters. You better be able to do that pretty well. Or if you're
It was funny when we opened in June, and we figured with it being summertime, we'd go really heavy on the lighter colored beers, right? But the first question that we got, I think, like within 5 customers walking in the door, where's your dark beers? People like stouts, they like the porters, and those recipes have been around for a long, long time.
Are they harder to make than the light beer?
Not necessarily.
You can hide more in them. Not that they would, but those
Like
lighter,
ghost peppers.
Yeah.
We have back there. Yep.
Yeah, you've all talked a lot about being independent and craft and keeping everything local. Was it 2 months ago, Brewers Association kicked off a major marketing campaign about take craft back, and in the last 10 days, Avery is no longer a craft brewer due to their 30% sale to Mohu San Miguel. How often have you had customers who are obviously have a high beer IQ? I mean, they're there for a reason. They like good beer. How often have they asked you, are you independent? Are we sure we're buying beer that isn't ABI or really
Not often enough.
I'd like to.
Do you get that a lot at all, or has it been absolutely zero?
If you don't mind, I'd like to field that one. So I think that that question is coming up a lot more now, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure what necessarily fuels that. I happen to, I think I have a little bit different perspective on it than a lot of people, because when I was in brewing school, I spent a lot of time with brewers from Anheuser-Busch. I spent a lot of time with brewers from Miller Coors, as well as, Scottish and Newcastle, a bunch of different people, And I tend to look at it like a lot of the bigger brewers help the microbrewers or craft brewers of that time really kind of rise up. They gave us the knowledge. They showed us where to find the equipment. They gave us the tools basically to create this industry, so to speak. I think there's a bit of a disconnect where the disconnect comes in is more on the marketing side of beer and more on the sort of the business side of beer. People definitely don't want to buy from big conglomerates, you know what I mean? And so they sort of fancy the smaller independent guys like that. But I don't think that there's definitely a lot of questions about that, but I think it's slightly misguided, I guess, is what I'd say. I'm not speaking not in support of our industry, but I think that without the bigger brewers, we would be in a much different place than we are today. Really, some of the other guys may feel differently about that, but from where I came from, that's sort of the way I feel. I think as long as we maintain the integrity and the quality and the craftsmanship of what we're doing, and the camaraderie and all the elements that go into our industry, I think it's still the same one way or another. I guess in a roundabout way, but there certainly is a lot of impetus or a lot of efforts being put forward to make sure people know who's who and what's independent and what's sort of big beer, right? Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah. I was just curious as to, Brewers Association, they collect dues from people like you that are small and large, and they're spending the money on the campaign, and I pledge, got my sticker just like everybody else. Just kind of curious as to how effective it's been. Have you had people come across the bar and say, hey, I want to be here because I want to know that you're independent? And, I look at Avery and I love their beers, I love their sours. To now for the Brewers Association to tell me as probably a promiscuous craft beer enthusiast that that's no longer craft beer. Well, no, the beer is still really very good. I was just kind of curious as to what you were seeing on the other side of the bar as a proprietor, as somebody
Also a big,
making your living.
like you're hearing, like this year we heard about a lot of decline in terms of the number of, or the growth of craft beer. But what you don't hear speak of is how many hundred thousands of barrels left sort of craft beer and joined forces with, Heineken, or joined forces with some of the other bigger conglomerates. You know what I mean? So there's definitely that, right? I don't think it's a bad thing. Like is Avery a worse brewery today than they were yesterday? I don't see it. Maybe it depends on how that company runs the company going forward. Maybe they totally destroy it. Maybe they don't. Maybe they let the guys just make the beer that they always made. And that's kind of what matters. You know what I mean? It is hard though, because I think that there's a lot of people that are frustrated with, not being seen as independent or being seen as part of, or the sort of the marketing efforts, the tricky marketing efforts by big brewers to, disguise themselves as a small independent craft brewer.
And I think we've had this in Wisconsin for a long time. When Leinenkugel's got bought by Miller, that it was kind of, we were way ahead of that in terms of like wrestling with that and how Miller treats Leinenkugel's and what Leinenkugel's is doing. And you always have that, are they, aren't they? I mean, in your case, you said no, they're not, but at the same time,
By the Brewers Association
Yeah.
definition, they're not as well
Right,
because of that
exactly.
ownership. But
ownership, but if you're old enough,
you go to Chippewa Falls,
right. Or
they're
you
not
go
going to
school
say
out
that's
of
not their
Clare,
brewery.
You have kind of a different perspective on it.
I guess to get back to directly what you're asking, do I get people that are walking in and asking me if I'm independent? Not as much as I want to. I want people to want to know where their beer comes from and who gets to make the decisions about what their beer or what their choices at my place is going to taste like, right? And it's not just me, it's all the employees, all the dudes that are working around me and making the product we have. Those are the guys that get to ultimately make the choice in what our beer is, and you're going to sit down right next to them at the bar at the end of the day and have a beer together. that's important. What I do see people come in and say is, hey, I just had this great new version of Shock Top the other day. It was as cool as craft beer I ever had. And that drives me insane. So I think that's maybe more of where I'm kind of on board with this. Hey, let's make sure people know what the distinction is between big beer and the guy that's down the street that's really trying to make a difference with not just his product, but his product in the community.
The idea of taking back craft, you know, that the Brewers Association has come out with, and everybody going out and buying the stock of ABI or whatever, it's actually quite clever, you know, because
It's been great. I mean, it's marketing that was on par with what ABI has been doing for years. It was well done, professionally done. It didn't feel amateur at all. I was just curious as, like I said, you're right. I know because I'm a home brewer and I pay attention, but I know of the 200 people that come through your tap room on a Saturday, I don't know what the number is, but I'm probably not the average. So I was just curious as to how that is playing with your smaller brewers. Is it helping you? Are you seeing that? Is the Brewers Association wasting their money?
So a Minnesota brewery recently named its IPA Dilly Dilly.
oh yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, I did like their response. I thought that was really great.
Okay, well, we're kind of wrapping up here. I want to pretty much hit our promise, a little bit over an hour and a half time limit. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come down here. Thank everybody who's online watching. Really appreciate it. If you want to go back, watch it again, we'll have it posted up on websites throughout USA Today Network, which is Green Bay Press Gazette, and our various other locations. You'll be able to grab it from there. If you want to go back, watch again, share with your friends. I really want to thank all of our guests for taking time out of their busy days to come down here and spend a couple hours to talk beer with us. Kathy for making the drive up from Milwaukee.
And sticking around for a beer afterwards.
Oh yeah, we're trying to strong our arm into that. And also thank you for the Brown County Library for letting us use the auditorium here.